Hi, welcome. For those of you who are not familiar with me or my practice, my name is Megan Warren, and I'm a certified coach specializing in emotional resilience. So who out there knows what emotional resilience is? Well, essentially, it's learning how to respond to challenging people and situations in ways that honor ourselves, but also still allow us to create win-win solutions. In addition to being an emotional resilience coach, I'm an expat single mom with a background in public health and business development. Now, before we jump into our topic today, I'd like to take a moment just to say that if this video or any of the other videos that I'm making resonates with you, subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be putting out weekly content that's designed to help you navigate some of the sticky challenges that you encounter in life. So today, we're going to be talking about how to ask for what you need. Now, this is a really personal topic for me because even after years of work, I still sometimes get that frog that sticks in my throat and blocks any request that I'm going to make. And there are times when I've even mapped out what I'm going to say. I go up to make the ask, my throat sticks, and I turn around and walk away without having made the ask. Now, I say this just to let you know that it is not easy. But there are four things that you can do that will help you find your voice. Now, the first of these relates to self-identity. Do you see yourself as a person who needs help? Or are you always the person that gives the help? I think a lot of us are okay with service to others in general, but if we can't ask for our needs to be met and they continually go unrecognized, we can experience resentment sometimes if other people continue to rely on us. So, are you the person who always offers the help, who gives the advice, who fixes the problems, and never asks? If so, sometimes seeing yourself on the other side of the coin can be difficult. Is it okay for you to have needs, or do you view that as weakness? Fixing others is useful, both because you get a good feeling out of it, but also because it absolutely enables you to avoid recognizing or addressing your own issues and problems. You don't have time to fix yourself because you're sitting with someone else's problems, and you don't have to sit with your own pain because it's easier to sit with someone else's pain. And anyway, maybe the pain isn't valid because somebody else has it worse. I mean, there are starving people in the world, and others are facing conflict and disease or catastrophic weather events. So your loneliness or your need to find work that you're passionate about, is it really a need? But I would challenge you to consider this. What's the point of life? Is the point of life scrabbling to fulfill those basic needs? Where once we meet hunger and thirst, all other needs are, like belonging or agency or using our skills, are those needs considered luxury? And even if you're able to accept that needs in general are okay, do you believe you deserve to have them met? Do you have the right to ask for support? Do you have the right to say no? Are you selfish if you have needs? And further, if your needs are met, well, what then? Who are you if you don't have pain or needs? Will you still be able to connect to your group or your community if you don't share the same pain points? If you don't identify with the needs of the group because your needs are already met, will you still be accepted? It's really amazing how much of our ease or our difficulty with asking for help relates to our self-concept, how we see ourselves and the world in general. And digging down into these questions can really give us a lot of information about ourselves that can help you reframe your perceptions and empower you to ask for what you need. If you don't see yourself as a person who needs help, is it because you view it as a weakness? Do you, kind of like me, have an ongoing inner dialogue that revolves around the word should? You should be strong enough. You should not need that. You have food. You have security. You shouldn't want anything more. understanding what you really believe and then comparing that to the unconscious thoughts that go around in our head and direct our behavior, well, it can be really useful to see if those unconscious thoughts actually support your true belief and if they're serving you. Now, one reason I struggle with this is because I grew up in a household with a survivalist point of view. If you have food and shelter, anything else is a luxury. It's not a need. You don't have the right to ask for more. It's greedy. And so I learned to ignore any wants or needs or desires or cravings that fell outside of those essential needs. And I also grew up equating strength as not having any needs. So I see myself as a strong and independent woman. So the idea that I might have needs, a strong woman is self-sufficient. She's not needy. So for a long time, I felt restless and unfulfilled and resentful because I wasn't able to reconcile my unspoken wishes and who I actually was and my desires with who I should be. And though, for a long time that formula worked. It kept me going. I moved through difficult times because I didn't stop to recognize needs and I only saw strength. And it also protected me because I didn't have to admit to or share or reach for my deepest desires. But one day I realized it wasn't working for me anymore. I wanted to move toward something, but I was using the formula to move by, to bypass rather than move through life. And so if you are ready to move through and toward life rather than by it, the first step is expanding your self-concept to accept that you are human and all humans have needs beyond the essential needs, that you have to meet those needs in order to live a fulfilled and satisfied life. If you want to expand your self-concept, you can start by using self-compassion. Now, Dr. Kristen Neff has a number of self-compassion exercises, and these can help you learn to drop the shoulds and really start to see your magnificence. And that will help you expand your self-concept, because if you're not rigidly applying narrow judgments that define who you are and what you should do, and you can begin to learn how you see your weaknesses, basically how they protect you and serve you, then you're better able to objectively register your needs. Now, another resource that can help is the practice of Tonglen. Now, Tonglen is a form of meditation. Tong means giving or sending, and Len means receiving or taking. Now, Tonglen starts on the inhale, in which you take your suffering and your unmet needs and desires, and you think of all the people in the world out there that share those same needs and desires. And as you breathe in with empathy for their suffering, because it's the same as yours. And then on the exhale, as you breathe out a wish for them to have what you would need in that moment. So the in-breath is about connecting to the pain, and the out-breath is about sending the comfort and the happiness that you wish for yourself, sending that out to others. Now, links to these resources can be found in the notes to the video, in the video description. So the second part of learning to ask for what you need is being able to actually recognize those needs. Often we have these big emotional reactions, and it does indicate that we have an unmet need, but we don't immediately equate our emotions, the irritation, the sense of betrayal, the anger or resentment that we feel in the moment to a need. We get triggered by some person or event, and then we don't stop in the moment to see what's behind the emotion. And then, of course, because the emotion is uncomfortable, we turn away from it. Who wants to feel painful emotions? But it's worth noting that whether we choose to turn toward or turn away from the emotion, we are bearing it. So turning away and not acknowledging it doesn't mean that you don't feel it, that you don't suffer from it. And since you're already bearing the emotion, if you can turn toward that emotion, you can make use of the incredible amount of information about your emotions to really better understand what you need. And that will help you resolve that emotion. So the next time that you're triggered or you wake up feeling listless or like you can't focus on anything, reframe that as an opportunity to get more information about what you need to feel better. Now, in my own journey, a frequent trigger was my ex-husband. He would come home late for work. I didn't like how vulnerable my need for connection felt, so I covered that vulnerability with irritation. And this protected me, right? It protected me from that vulnerable feeling. But I would not say that the irritation that I replaced it with really felt any better. But in essence, covering the need with another emotion that was easier, though not really more pleasant, it was easier to bear it, but it blocked my ability to have that need met. And I couldn't possibly connect with my ex-husband from that irritable and blaming state. And it took me years to see that my need to have more quality time to connect with him on things that matter to us, like if I had been able to recognize and voice that need, maybe I could have been able to find a way to voice it in a proactive and solution-focused way, rather than being passive-aggressive. My ex-husband would have come home to a very different person. Maybe that would have made him have wanted to have spent time together and connect. Or maybe if it wasn't possible in that moment, if I had defined what I needed, maybe we could have brainstormed together other possibilities that, maybe it would have increased our connections and have met my needs and left us stronger as a couple. I use this simply to illustrate that identifying needs, while it's scary and it is uncomfortable, it's an incredible gift that you can give yourself and the other people in your life. Now, another reason that we often deny our needs is that we think that if others love us, they will recognize our needs. But that's asking them to mind read. If you can't recognize your own needs, meaning you can see the irritation or the sadness, but you don't see the need behind it, why would it even be possible for another person to see it? And beyond that, why would it be their responsibility? It's as if their love for us gives them the responsibility to ensure our happiness. Now, I find this a frequent refrain in client sessions, and it's one that I used to believe. But, it's a belief based on an error in logic. We believe other people are responsible for our happiness, and we are responsible for theirs. But that's a false notion. It believes that we have control over others, and they have control over us. But have you ever found yourself in a situation where your intentions were pure, and you tried your best, but no matter what you did, the other person was unhappy and upset? You meant well, right? And you felt badly that they were angry or dissatisfied with you and with the situation. It just goes to show that no matter how much you plan, no matter how pure your intention or how perfectly you deliver, you cannot control how the other person receives your offering. So the truth is actually the inverse of this premise, right? We, or you, are responsible for your own thoughts, feelings, and actions, and other people are responsible for theirs. So go back to the last time you were triggered. Do you hold the person who made you angry or upset, do you hold them responsible? What if you reframe the story that you told yourself in such a way that you weren't triggered by those circumstances? In my case, if I'd been able to reframe the story I was telling myself around how my ex-husband didn't value me when he was late, it meant he didn't consider me. if I could have reframed that to see that the context wasn't about me, and if I could have acknowledged the patterns and beliefs that he held that kept him at work late, well, maybe it would have made the trigger less sensitive. When you can own your needs, your emotions, and your role in any circumstance or relationship, you're able to see the wider context that gives you the details, the granularity to be able to be less triggered, because it's not about you. And then that dissolves the trigger. So if you are ready to learn how to take responsibility for your emotions and your reactions to people and situations, you can start by being an observer. Note the storyline going on in your head and ask yourself from a third-person perspective, how true is that story? What is that story doing for me? What purpose does it serve? If I change the story, what result would I get? So, how does that story keep you from identifying your needs? When you can separate from the story, you're less emotionally involved. And then you're able to be curious and you're able to see things, that the story's hiding, like your needs. And so this brings us to the third part of being able to ask for what you need. You must be able to accept what the story hides. Now, it was not only hard for me to see myself as a person who needs others, it was hard to bear the sense of vulnerability that comes with having needs. To recognize and voice your needs is, it's to open to the possibility that you aren't perfect. And admitting that you want or need something is hard. It's hard because, as I mentioned earlier, it might require that you reframe how you see yourself. But it's also difficult because it requires that you share that soft, vulnerable spot with someone else. And so when you voice your needs, it can require that you open to the other person that you're reaching out to, and that the unspoken wish or, what you're asking for, you may be disappointed or hurt. So you have to be willing to take that risk, and that requires courage and vulnerability. Now, practicing self-compassion will help you open to the possibility that you're not a perfectly self-contained and self-sufficient unit. And practicing Tonglen can help you find the courage to be vulnerable, because you see beyond the risk to the fact that we all have needs, and those needs are universally similar. And you can see beyond the risk to the reward. If you share and you are vulnerable, it creates a safe space where others can do the same. Now, we've covered a lot so far, so if you're still with me, and you've noted how you can recognize and accept your needs, the fourth and final part is learning to voice those needs. Once you know what you need, how do you ask for it? How many of us believe that asking won't work because the person on the other end either won't be able to meet our needs or they won't want to? Now, this builds on the third part where you accept the risk because of the impact you can have and the reward that it will bring. Now, if you're in a place to accept the risk and you are practicing self-compassion and Tonglen, you're going to want to make your ask in a way that honors yourself and others. And this is going to require creating a safe space. So to create a safe space, you're first you're going to need to release the negative emotions. When an event that drives us absolutely batty, or a person, we go through the same frustrating scene over and over again, we end up storing emotions. And we store them up to the point where even if we take the time to recognize our needs and we reframe the story, a lot of times we still react the same way because when we're triggered, we haven't actually changed our physiological response. So we get the same flood of hormones and the same negative emotions. Now, there are many ways you can release stored emotions to enable you to release them. And it gives you space for new emotions and that better reflect that new story that you're telling yourself. Now, the most effective way for me personally to release toxic emotions is through practicing emotional freedom technique. Now, it's a tapping technique that releases stored emotions, and I've put a link in the video description that explains the process and kind of how you do it. Another way you could do is to meditate. You could center yourself, you could pray, you could go for a long run or bike ride or swim. In essence, you're doing whatever it is that lets you release the negative emotions and puts you in contact with your best and higher self. So the second step in creating a safe space is setting expectations. It's planning what you will do and then thinking through the impact the different outcomes will have on you that really allows you to register and process your reaction prior to the moment where you have to ask for what you need. Now, you're probably not going to be able to plan for all of the micro possibilities, but you can plan for the worst, best, and most likely scenarios. So that planning will really help you detach from that sense of risk and vulnerability. So in my case, if I'm asking my ex-spouse for quality time, the worst case is that he rejects that. The best case is that he accepts it. The most likely case is that he agrees, but he's rather unenthusiastic and he doesn't jump in. Envisioning his response allows me to receive and accept my own emotional reaction, and this better lets me understand what each of his reactions mean for me and what I need from him. And then I can use this knowledge to set boundaries that protect myself. Now, by boundaries, I do not mean armored walls that keep you socially and emotionally distanced from other people. By boundaries, I mean defining what works for you in each possible scenario and each possible outcome, right? So, starting with a situation in which you make the request, what do you need to feel safe as you make that request? Do you need to feel respected? Do you need to feel like you have space and time to share? Do you need a two-way dialogue or physical contact? And then conversely, how can you make that request in such a way that the other person hears you? So I can attest that starting the conversation with blame, shame, pain, that recipe does not create a safe space for the other person to receive your words. So looking at my scenario again, if I asked my ex-husband for quality time, and I started with words or tone or body language that I knew triggered him, I mean, how likely is it that he's going to be able to see and honor my needs no matter how valid they are? How much better is the outcome going to be if I can own my own feelings and be clear about what I'm asking for? And then, what if instead of having, noted in a snarky tone, of course, that he was working a lot, which then would immediately create a sense of guilt or anger in him, what if I started with how much I loved him and how much to thrive I needed contact with people I respected and loved and enjoyed, and that I needed to share meaningful things with him in a dedicated time? Asking directly for more time in that sense may have created a very different scenario than the one that I enacted over and over again. So as you move through the various scenarios that occur, consider what reactions or tone or language, and that's both verbal and nonverbal, or what possibilities are acceptable or unacceptable for you. And then once you have a concrete picture of what's acceptable, draw in your boundaries. These are really support structures that guard what's acceptable for you, and they create a guideline that help you mark the conversation so that when that conversation or that situation veers outside of what's acceptable, well, you've noted it. So then you can plan for what you're going to do if and when that happens. So, for example, if you make the ask and the other person starts yelling and you've decided this is outside of the acceptable zone, well, then you know in advance, because you've planned for it, that you're going to walk away and you're going to tell them that you can come back to the conversation when they can continue in a reasonable tone. And then conversely, you've thought through that whatever you're demanding of them, you're also going to commit to giving. So if you find yourself shouting in that moment and you can't release that a moment and return to a normal state, then you already know that you're going to walk away and tell them you need a moment, and you'll come back when you can continue the conversation in a normal voice. So thank you so much for listening to the end. In closing, I'm going to quickly summarize the 4 steps. So if you missed something or you want to recap, get your pens out. So firstly, accept that needs in general are okay and reframe your self-identity. You're a person with needs that go beyond water and shelter, and you must accept that those needs are valid. Practicing Tonglen and self-compassion can support this step. Secondly, learn to recognize the need that's hiding behind the emotion, and then use the emotion or the trigger as a way to go in and see that need, and then act as an observer and detach from that story and see what you're telling yourself and what, plumb the depths of you, so to speak, to see what your need is. And then the third step is accepting that you have needs and you have to own them. No one else can do it for you. You must accept that you're not a self-sufficient, self-contained unit. And you have to accept that having needs requires that you take the risk to be vulnerable and open yourself to disappointment. Again, practicing self-compassion and Tonglen will really help support that. And then lastly, you must create a safe space in which you can make the ask. You do this by releasing toxic emotions, tapping into your higher self. Then you set your expectations and you prepare for as many possible scenarios as you can. And then you create the boundaries that outline what is acceptable, and you plan for what you will do if the context of your big ask veers away from what you've defined as acceptable. So that's it in a nutshell. I hope you have a better understanding now of how you can ask for what you want. My challenge to you this week is to think of one situation where, you're not asking for what you need. And take the process that we just walked through and make a single ask on behalf of yourself. And then after you do, come back and comment on it. Tell me how it went. If it went well, then I can celebrate with you. And if it didn't unfold the way that you thought it was going to, well, comment on that too. And then we can look at how to shift you, how to get you unstuck. Now, I have put notes in the video, so you can, if you have any questions around the process, you can go there to see those resources. And then you also can go to my website, both to get the resources that I mentioned, to read more in my blog if you want to read about that. And then also, if you would like to schedule a discovery call with me to kind of explore, working through how to make an ask personally, you can go to www.meganwarrencoaching.com. Be well. Thanks for listening.